welcome to Daybreak. You're watching it live on A News, and I'm your host, Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. Let's take a look at the headlines. The US has launched fresh strikes on Iran after Trump declared interim peace efforts has collapsed. The International Monetary Fund warns the global economic risks are rising as conflict continues to weigh in on growth. And the US removes Syria from its list of state sponsors of terrorism. To our top story this morning, the confrontation between Washington and Tehran is entering a dangerous new phase, with military action now spreading across the Gulf, along with Trump's announcement that the ceasefire is over, is causing alarm both regionally and around the globe. Here's what's happened over the past few hours.
The United States has carried out a new wave of strikes on southern Iran after President Donald Trump warned he would hit them hard again following Tuesday's exchange of attacks. Explosions were reported along Iran's southern coast, including in the port cities of Bandar Abbas and Sirik on the strategically important Strait of Hormuz, while air defense systems were activated in Bandar Abbas. American military officials say its forces struck around 90 Iranian military targets. President Trump says the operation was retaliation for what he described as Iran's bombing of ships the previous day.
We just hit them very hard, and I say we hit them 20 to 1. Every time they hit us, we're going to hit them 20. And we did it last night. They did a little something today, but it was really retribution for last night. They hit actually 3 boats, not 2. And when they hit, we hit back much harder.
The US Central Command says the strikes were aimed at keeping the Strait of Hormuz open to shipping. Iran has not yet officially responded to the latest strikes. However, Iran's top negotiator, Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf, wrote on social media that any US military action would be met with an immediate response. Meanwhile, Gulf countries reported fresh Iranian attacks. Explosions were heard in Bahrain's capital, Manama. Kuwait said it intercepted missiles and drones, and Qatar issued a security alert. Speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One, President Trump said Iran had recently contacted the United States seeking a deal, but he questioned whether Tehran could be trusted to honor any future agreement.
Now let's take a look at the story shaping the day across the globe, and we stick with our first story, which is leading on the website New York Times, and its headline reads, Iran war, live updates, US launch new strikes on Iran, military says. So as you just heard in that particular report, a number of things have really escalated over the past 24 hours, and the US has launched a round of strikes on Iran after President Donald Trump actually signaled he'd hit them hard again tonight. And that was what he was saying after the NATO summit in Turkey. Now, explosions have been reported by Iranian state media in parts of the country's southern area, as well as the latest strikes. Trump has also put out on his Truth Social post that this is in retribution for yesterday's bombing of ships by Iran. If it happens again, it will get much worse. Iran has not yet commented to that or provided any form of response, but previously warned that if there was an attack, that it would be met with an immediate response as well. Now, the US Central Command said that the strikes were carried out to further degrade Tehran's ability to threaten freedom of navigation in the strait. And in its statement, it said that the United States is holding Iran accountable for recent unjustified aggression against commercial shipping and civilian crews freely navigating a vital international waterway. Now, the extent of the damage from the US strike is yet to be known. However, it has been reported that there have been power cuts in a number of areas, as well as the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, also their barracks also being hit as well. So we know that now a deal with Iran is very unlikely at this moment in time, because Trump has announced that the ceasefire is currently over, and also he added that he doesn't feel that they're worthy of making a deal. In his own words, he says, I don't know that they're going to honor the deal. That's the problem. And he's mentioned this all on Wednesday. Now, it's something that we're watching very closely, as you can imagine, over the escalation between the two countries. Now, let's move over to our next headline this morning, and that's in relation to NATO. And if we go to the Wall Street Journal, because on here it says 5 takeaways from the NATO summit. Now, NATO leaders met in Turkey for the past 2 days, and I just wanted to highlight some of those key outtakes that were highlighted in the meeting. Now, they also point to a number of things like defense spending and capability boosting, which promises further assistance for Ukraine, and say that Iran must open the Strait of Hormuz as well. Donald Trump says that the ceasefire deal with Iran is over, and then threatened to cut trade ties with Spain. Denmark's Prime Minister also was there and stated that Greenland is not for sale in response to Trump's demands for the territory. NATO Chief Mark Rutte called on the US strikes on Iran absolutely necessary as well during the summit, and billions worth of defense acquisitions have been announced. Alongside that, President Donald Trump said the US would grant Ukraine a license to manufacture Patriot missile interceptors, which was a great benefit to Ukraine and Zelensky. And Trump also said that he and Zelensky had developed a very good relationship, also insisting that both Kyiv and Moscow want to end the war. And if we go to the next link, it will just show some more pictures of what we saw throughout the coming days. If we just scroll through that, as you'll see, there are some family photos of all NATO leaders joining in Turkey, as well as meetings on the sidelines as well. Just going through some of those top things, the US President Trump has held the tremendous unity at the NATO summit in Ankara and described it as tremendously successful, which is really interesting because he's been very much pushing NATO and criticizing its attempts to not help the US during its war campaign with Iran, and was very much vocal on that. But some of these pictures now coming up, as you can see, the leaders gathered round tables to discuss a number of issues. Now, Trump also referred to NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte as a tremendous unifier. The US president also praised the increases in European defense spending, taking credit for the increased contributions as well throughout the course of the summit. And just to add, Greenland's Prime Minister, which I did mention previously before, did issue a short press release in response to Trump's renewed call for the US to control the Arctic island. And this is what he said. He said, "I must repeat with difficulty, Greenland is not for sale," Nielsen said, writing in the Greenlandic official language. Now, he said its borders, international law and sovereignty will be respected. The future of Greenland will be decided by us, is what the Prime Minister of Greenland said. So still something that Trump is pushing forward on, but it's something that Greenland is definitely pushing back. And we know that a lot of the NATO allies stand with Greenland for it to be an autonomous state led under the relationship and the connection to Denmark as well. So just some of the things that was able to come out, but we will be able to speak about this later on in the program, where I will be joined by a guest to kind of delve more deeply into what the outcomes were when it comes to the NATO alliances and the key goals that they were trying to achieve in this particular summit, as you can see there. Okay, now let's move over to our next headline this morning, and that's on the BBC website, and that's in relation to the plane crash in Pakistan, because 5 crew remain missing after plane wreckage found in Pakistan. Now, 5 crew members are still out there. Search and rescue teams are looking for them. But this happened after a wreckage of a Boeing 737 plane that went missing off the coast of Pakistan has been located, aviation officials have said. Now, Pakistan's airport authority said efforts are underway to find those who are on board the private cargo plane, which had been traveling from Karachi, a city in southern Pakistan, to the United Arab Emirates on Tuesday. Now, the Boeing 737 was operated by K2 Airways and rapidly descended and lost contact with air traffic controllers on Tuesday evening local time. Now, the plane had reported a navigation system problem minutes before its descent. After a 12-hour search involving air and sea assets, the wreckage was recovered from 53 nautical miles south of Mara, a port town in the coast of the Arabian Sea. So Amara is actually located 360 kilometers west of Karachi, where the plane began its journey. So we will provide you with more information as we get it. Hopefully they can find, if any, some form of, some survivors from this cargo plane crash. Okay, and our last story headline this morning, and that's on the Guardian website. And it really delves deeper into what took place over in China with its typhoon tornado. So if we just scroll down, obviously this is the major picture of what you can see there. But if we just scroll down a little bit, and then you can see here Typhoon, tornadoes, landslides, deadly weather ravages China in pictures. And if we can just look, keep scrolling down to look at all those pictures there, because the typhoon, tornadoes, landslide, deadly weather ravages China. And due to that, it's the typhoon Maisak, which caused severe flooding and killed 6 in Guangxi, while tornadoes in Hubei province in the center killed at least 11. Now, we do know that rescuers have evacuated stranded residents in the southern China province, and more trying to get people to safety. And as you can see on your screen, just some of these pictures of rescue workers going out there and trying to get as many people to safety as possible. Now, residents ride through Nanning's waterlogged streets. Mud covers a street as well. You're going to see loads of these pictures coming up at the moment. Guangzhou has been allocated 100 million won after Typhoon Maisak caused 6 deaths, and then 130,000 evacuations as well. And rescuers wade through flood waters to try and find survivors in what this typhoon and flooding has caused. As you can see, as the pictures continue, people driving through the very bad torrential rain downpour. Now, a riverside park in Nanning was also inundated with floodwater from the typhoon Maisak, and rescue workers evacuated residents stranded by floodwaters as well. So you can just see those pictures coming through of a number of residents, but there we are. Okay, and that's your morning press headline wrap up. Now let's take a short break, and when I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global stories.
More than 20,000 partisan fighters have been hidden. We found only 3,000.
My grandmother had 3 brothers. In the graveyard, the body of just one of them.
Their struggle was very unequal and against a state that had defeated such a force as Nazi Germany.
A lot of resistant fighters in the beginning of Soviet occupation actually would end up here, if not killed somewhere in the woods.
She was arrested at her home. Her 7-year-old daughter ran to her and screamed, "Mom, please take me with you." This record having the names of the individuals who were placed in the list of deportations.
I was born in Kengia, in a labor camp. My mother was a partisan liaison.
The first years were extremely difficult, of course. Poverty, hunger. The temperature sometimes dropped to minus 50 degrees.
The train stations, like the one behind me, once said goodbyes to thousands of people carried from across the Baltic states towards Siberia.
We are in Seoul, the Republic of Korea, a country that for more than 70 years has lived in the shadow of unfinished war.
I was 18 years old when the Korean War broke out. My 2 brothers were dragged out to the front yard of the village public hall and forcibly subjected to a trial under the name of People's Trial.
The military demarcation line, created after the Korean War, became a massive wall, preventing separated families from meeting.
Less than a kilometer away lies North Korea.
지금 우리 무장력은 그 어떤 위기에도 대응할 철저한 준비가 되어 있으며
Подписанный сегодня договор предусматривает в том числе оказание взаимной помощи в случае агрессии против одного из участников.
Russian-Ukraine war now is connected with North Korean participation in Russian army.
The complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is the only outcome that we will find acceptable.
If the U.S. persists in such hostile policy towards the DPRK, there will never be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's take a look at the global stories. And as the crisis in the Middle East continues to create uncertainty for the global economy, the International Monetary Fund says world growth is expected to slow next year before recovering in 2027. The IMF says the impact of the conflict is being partly offset by rapid advances in artificial intelligence, which is boosting global demand. It has also upgraded China's growth forecast after a stronger than expected start to the year, while warning that higher oil prices and ongoing uncertainty remain key risks. Relations between the US and Spain have come under renewed strain, with tensions spilling into the week's NATO summit in Ankara. Our A News correspondent Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where U.S. President Donald Trump has turned his attention to Spain, escalating tensions with one of America's oldest NATO allies. At the NATO summit in Ankara, Trump called Spain, quote, a terrible partner and a wasted cause. He then instructed Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, for the second time since March, to immediately cut off all trade with the country. The move follows months of friction over Spain's defense spending and its refusal to back U.S. military operations against Iran. Trump has repeatedly criticized Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, who leads a minority socialist government, for rejecting NATO's target of spending 5% of GDP on defense. But Madrid insists it can meet the alliance's military capability goals while spending about 2%. Spain also angered Washington by refusing to allow U.S. forces to use Spanish bases and, more recently, by closing its airspace to American aircraft involved in the Iran conflict. Now, Madrid dismissed Trump's latest announcement, noting that trade policy for EU member states is negotiated by Brussels rather than individual governments. And later, Sanchez said he had a, quote, very cordial conversation with Trump in Ankara discussing the World Cup and golf, but not defense spending. He's also announced a fresh troop deployment to Finland for NATO's Arctic Sentry mission, underscoring Madrid's argument that it remains committed to the alliance. Sanchez said Spain and the U.S. have strong ties that have endured regardless of the political parties in power. On the economic front, BlackRock remains bullish on Spain, while legal experts question whether Trump can actually enforce a complete trade cutoff, noting that a full embargo would likely require declaring a national emergency under U.S. law. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Western efforts to limit Russia's oil revenues are putting renewed focus on the shipping companies still carrying Russian crude and on how much money they have made under the G7 price cap system. Here's more.
Greek shipping companies have earned billions of dollars from transporting Russian oil, despite Western efforts to limit Moscow's energy revenues. That's according to a Financial Times analysis, which says Greek ship owners made at least $3.8 billion from the trade over the past 3 years. The report says Dynacom Tankers, Stealth Maritime, and the Onassis Group were among the biggest earners under the G7 price cap system of $60 per barrel. Since July 2023, Dynacom has earned more than $915 million from Russian crude shipments. Onassis Group's Olympic Shipping and Management earned at least $404 million, while Stealth Maritime and Polembros Shipping each made more than $200 million. The report also recalls tensions between Athens and Kiev after Ukraine briefly listed several Greek tanker companies as international sponsors of war in 2023 before removing them following pressure from the Greek government. The trade is permitted as long as oil from Russia is sold below the G7 price cap, but enforcement has faced criticism. The Financial Times says its estimate covers 389 million barrels shipped by Greek companies, while further cargoes were excluded because pricing data was unavailable. The report also says 8 of the 20 companies earning the most from Russian oil shipments since June 2023 are Greek. The findings come as the US and European Union step up efforts to tighten sanctions on Moscow's energy revenues.
And alongside this, Russia is facing growing pressure on its fuel market after Ukrainian strikes targeted oil facilities in several regions. Moscow insists its energy systems remains resilient, but it has now moved to restrict diesel exports and increase supplies at home. Let's go to this report for more.
Russia is moving to protect its domestic fuel market after repeated Ukrainian strikes on its oil infrastructure, which adds pressure to supplies. On Thursday, it's reported that 2 oil facilities have been hit in Stavropol Krai and Tver. The latest attacks come as fuel shortages and price spikes have already been reported in several Russian regions, with drivers facing hours-long queues at filling stations. Now Moscow has introduced a temporary ban on diesel exports to increase supplies at home. However, Russian President Vladimir Putin says the country's energy system remains resilient.
It is absolutely clear that the enemy is trying to harm the economy and, most importantly, create nervous situation in the society. We all understand that this task is impossible to accomplish. The Russian energy system's resilience is very high, one of the highest in the world.
Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak says the fuel situation remains complex and acknowledges public concern. He says the export ban would help redirect diesel to the domestic market, while Russia is also preparing to import fuel in July. The government says the ban, which includes fuel producers, will remain in place until the 31st of July. Russia's seaborne diesel and gasoil exports had already fallen sharply in June, dropping 39% from the previous month to around 1.8 million metric tons. Benchmark European diesel margins rose to a record level after the export ban was announced. Turkey and Brazil remained the main buyers of Russian diesel in June, while Morocco, Egypt and Senegal were also among major importers. Meanwhile, Russia has fired ballistic missiles at Kiev overnight and sent jet-powered drones over the city throughout Wednesday. Ukrainian officials say 3 people have been killed and 13 people, including a child, are injured.
Over to South America, and 2 weeks after Venezuela's devastating twin earthquakes, relief efforts are entering a new phase. As thousands remain homeless and communities continue to rebuild, the government is seeking access to frozen overseas assets to help fund the country's recovery.
2 weeks after Venezuela's twin earthquakes, the country's recovery effort is increasingly focused on humanitarian relief, reconstruction, and support for thousands of families left without homes. Aid distribution continues across the worst affected areas, with residents in La Guaira receiving food and essential supplies as local and international organizations expand their operations.
We are grateful to the diaspora, to Venezuelan immigrants across the United States, particularly in Miami, and to the donors and sponsors for delivering this humanitarian aid to people who have been greatly affected. We already have our first warehouse here, and we plan to stay for several years bringing aid. Today, we will deliver more than 2,000 family boxes, one for each family.
Across the country, businesses and volunteers are continuing to adapt to the scale of the tragedy. In one workshop, fashion designers have suspended normal production to manufacture body bags, reflecting the continuing human toll of the disaster.
It is a completely different feeling, because there is pain, but at the same time it fills us with satisfaction to know that from our small contribution and from our platform, we are helping.
The acting president says Venezuela has formally requested the release of state assets frozen abroad.
I have decided to send a letter, among others, to the King of England, asking for the gold being held at the Bank of England to be released. That gold belongs to our people, and it must be used to address the terrible, tragic consequences of this double earthquake. Venezuela has the resources to recover and to get back on its feet.
According to National Assembly President Jorge Rodriguez, the death toll has risen to more than 3,800, with more than 16,740 people injured. More than 6,400 people have been rescued, nearly 18,000 remain homeless, and almost 87,000 families have received assistance.
With this, more than 430 pets have been rescued in Venezuela following the earthquakes that struck the country last month. Most of the dogs and cats, with many receiving treatment for dehydration and anemia, according to state TV. Rescue teams have been carrying out overnight searches to improve their chances of finding animals trapped beneath the rubble. The US President Donald Trump announced on Wednesday that he's decided to remove Syria from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. Trump said the move would help remove barriers of rebuilding the country and encourage American investment. The decision has been sent to Congress, which will carry out a 45-day review before it can take effect. Syrian officials welcomed the announcement, saying it would support investment, economic recovery, and the country's return to the global economy. The move follows Trump's decision to end a US sanctions program on Syria last year. El Salvador says its navy has made the largest cocaine seizure in the country's history after intercepting 2 boats in Pacific waters. The haul was displayed in La Paz, where soldiers and police unloaded bundles from the vessels. Defense Minister said the boats were carrying about 6.68 tons of cocaine in total, with part of it valued more than $81 million. 6 crew members were detained, 2 Ecuadorians and 4 Colombians. Now over to East Asia, and Chinese artificial intelligence is gaining ground in the US, with a growing number of American companies choosing Chinese AI models for over some of the Silicon Valley's biggest names. Analysts say the shift reflects a new phase in the global AI race. Our reporter Abuhaya Jafarova reports from Shanghai in China.
The race in artificial intelligence is no longer just about building the most powerful model. Increasingly, it's about delivering the best performance at the lowest cost. That's why a growing number of US companies are turning to Chinese AI developers, including DeepSeek and GPU, as they expand AI-powered products and services. According to CNBC, Chinese models have accounted for more than 30% of AI traffic processed through the OpenRouter platform every week since February, reaching a peak of 46%, up sharply from an average of just 11% over the previous year. The shift is already reshaping business decisions. US AI startup Lindsay recently migrated its entire workload from Anthropic's Claude to DeepSeek, saying the move is expected to save the company millions of dollars. Chinese developers have built their competitive edge by focusing on efficiency as much as performance. Companies including DeepSeek, GPU, and Alibaba's Qwen have invested heavily in open source development, smarter model architecture, and more efficient inference, allowing them to deliver strong results while using less computing power. At the same time, US export restrictions on advanced chips have accelerated China's focus on algorithmic innovation, helping domestic AI firms build increasingly capable models without relying on the most advanced hardware. As the AI race enters a new phase, the advantage may no longer belong to the company with the biggest model, but to the one that offers the best balance of performance, efficiency, and cost. Abuhaya Jafarova, A News, Shanghai, China.
Now to North America, and Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney has arrived in Saudi Arabia for the first visit by a Canadian leader in 26 years. The trip comes as Ottawa looks to strengthen trade and investment ties beyond its heavy dependence on the US following new tariffs and trade uncertainty under President Donald Trump. Carney is due to meet Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and attend a Canada-Saudi investment forum as both countries seek closer economic cooperation. Now to a quick break, but when I return, I'll discuss the key regional headlines making its way across this day, and I'll also be joined by a guest to dig into those stories. Don't go anywhere.
Hello and welcome to Primetime. What a show we've got lined up for you today. In a complex world, clarity is power. Two hours live, diplomacy dissected in a spin-free environment. That's Prime Time with me, Guy Schoen, weekdays on A News.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenging.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. One important note to this. I'm here. Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the shade of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Welcome back and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's return to the region and we head over to what was taking place over Turkey over the last days from the NATO summit, because in the Turkish capital it has now come to a close after 2 days of talks on the alliance's future priorities. Secretary General Mark Rutte says the meeting has laid the groundwork for the next phase of NATO's security agenda. Here's our correspondent with more.
NATO Chief Mark Rutte says the Ankara summit has marked a turning point for the alliance, describing it as one focused on delivering concrete commitments rather than making new promises. Speaking at a closing press conference, Rutte said allied leaders had agreed on a clear path towards strengthening NATO's deterrence and defense capabilities over the coming decade. The issue of defense spending, meanwhile, dominated both days of the 2-day summit. Rutte welcomed what he described as credible national plans to meet NATO's target of investing 5% of GDP in defense and security by 2035, saying allies were now turning financial commitments into real military capabilities. He also stressed the need to expand defense industrial production, saying NATO has to produce more missiles, ammunition, air defense systems, and other vital military equipment to respond to a dangerous global security environment. On Ukraine, Rutte reaffirmed NATO's long-term support for Kiev, saying allies would continue providing the military assistance needed for Ukraine to defend itself while maintaining pressure on Russia. Earlier the same day, U.S. President Donald Trump met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on the summit's sidelines, where they discussed continued military support for Kiev, including additional air defense capabilities. Both sides described the meeting as constructive, underscoring continued engagement between Washington and Kiev, despite earlier strains in the relationship. Rutte, for his part, said the United States remains fully committed to NATO, while welcoming increased defense contributions from European allies and Canada as evidence of a stronger transatlantic partnership. The summit brought together leaders from NATO's 32 member states at Turkey's presidential complex, where discussions focused on defense spending, the war in Ukraine, Black Sea security, the Middle East, and expanding the alliance's industrial base. Alongside the leaders meeting, NATO's Defense Industry Forum unveiled new multinational procurement and production initiatives designed to accelerate military manufacturing and improve interoperability across the alliance. Rutte said the decisions taken in Ankara would strengthen NATO's collective defense and ensure the alliance remains prepared to meet evolving security challenges. Implementation of the summit's commitments, he added, will now become NATO's top priority. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Turkish capital Ankara.
Now we know that there were a great number of highlights that came out of the summit, one being the announcement for the F-35 fighter jets for Turkey was going to be considered, as well as Ukraine getting a license to manufacture Patriot missile interceptors. NATO also pledged to increase military equipment expenditure to at least 70 billion euros, plus Trump's candid remarks on Iran and the alliance. Joining me now to reflect on the summit is Becca Ilan, Turkey's Research Foundation in Ankara is where he is joining us from. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
My first question in this is, what do you see as the single most consequential outcome of the two-day NATO summit? And what decisions are likely to have the greatest impact over the next 5 years rather than just an immediate aftermath?
Yeah, I would say that it was a returning point for NATO, and looking at the summit declaration, I think there are three important things I would say. One is that the allies, still committed to, increase their defense expenditures or defense investments to the 5% of their GDP. And they push to increase their defense industry capacity and their serial production capacity, and also they again reaffirm their strong support to Ukraine. And also one important thing is was Iran. Looking at the declaration, it mentions about Iran, and the allies say that Iran, shouldn't have a nuclear weapon, and Iran should respect the freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. But overall, looking at the entire picture, I would say this Ankara summit, was another reaffirmation for NATO's, decisions that were taken last year in the summits. In Netherlands, in the summits, the NATO allies, just pledged to increase their defense spending to 5% of their GDP for the next 10 years. And I would say that after that, we're talking about a more European NATO, a less American NATO. And in the upcoming decade, I would say, NATO allies, will try to increase their defense budget and will try to achieve these targets. But I think that it will be a hard choice for NATO, because most of NATO members, I would say, still struggle to, achieve their, defense expenditures, to that target. And I would say, looking at the, again, entire picture, overall for Turkey, it was a diplomatic success, because hosting and organizing such a, big event is not an easy task. But, Turkey hosted this event, very successfully, I would say. And also, again, Turkey is increasing its role within the NATO, and also Turkey is restoring its relations with the United States, I would say.
I see. Now, Turkey has often positioned itself as both a critical NATO ally and an independent regional power. How did Ankara use this summit to advance its own strategic objectives, and did it succeed in that?
Yeah, I would say, Turkey has its own national security priorities. Turkey has its own, agendas, of course. And also, on the other hand, Turkey is a critical NATO ally. But I think Turkey's role in NATO has been changing in recent years. As I said, Turkey has always been an important NATO actor, given its, land forces. But today, one important thing, which is Turkey's defense industry capacity, individual defense industry capacity, comes to fore, I would say, because looking at this 5% target, I would say, NATO requires all allies, all member states, increase their defense expenditure and defense investment by investing their own defense industrial capacity. And as I said, most of NATO members, will have hard times to achieve this target. But Turkey, at this point, given its massive investment in defense capacity, given its massive investment in domestic production capacity, has a different place, within NATO framework, I would say. And in upcoming years, of course, should Turkey, engage in multinational defense project and multilateral defense projects, I would say Turkey will also contribute to the defense investments of NATO. But of course, NATO allies, should remove all sanctions on trade barriers, because it also, damages to the spirit of alliance of Turkey. Also emphasized this, if we are talking about more European NATO, if we are talking about shared and common defense projects, but why we are still imposing defense barriers, or why we are still imposing trade sanctions to each other. It's a contradiction, and Turkey emphasized this. And also, as I said, given its defense industry capacity, Turkey is ready to contribute to NATO, given its domestic and national investment in this sector, I would say.
I see. And for countries then in the South Caucasus, more closer to home, what are the practical implications of the summit's outcomes? Could NATO's evolving posture influence regional security partnerships here, or like energy corridors, for example?
Yeah, I would say, of course, South Caucasus is an important region geopolitically for NATO and also for Russia as well. But I don't think that South Caucasus will become a hot point or a point of clash between NATO and Russia, I would say, because the main front is Ukraine. And as for energy security, of course, South Caucasus, will be, an important region for NATO allies. And at this point, I would say the regional countries like Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, and also if engaged, Armenia, could play an important role, bridging the Asia and Europe, I would say, and also they can contribute, to the regional security and also the European security. And looking at the European security architecture, as I said, the Eastern Front, the Eastern European Front is important militarily, but of course for economic reasons, for energy reasons, and for infrastructure reasons, I would say, of course, NATO and also Turkey needs South Korea as well, but I don't think that it's going to be an important point of clash between NATO and Russia.
And I'll be interested to get your thoughts on what you think Russia will interpret by the outcomes of the summit, especially with the US's announcement to provide Ukraine with a license to manufacture Patriot missile interceptors. What do you think Russia's position on that would look like?
Yeah, of course, Russia will be a little bit angry about it, but of course, we are talking about NATO, and the very reason NATO was established was against Russian threat, Soviet threat at that time. And for now, of course, Russia, is considering to, increase its defense capacity as well. But looking at the Ukrainian front, I would say, right now there is a stalemate, military stalemate in the front, and there is no major offensive from both sides. And also the conflict zone, looking at the conflict zone, I would say, as I said, there is a stalemate, military stalemate. But in the future, I would say, or in the near future, I would say, Russia will not be able to, overcome the Ukrainian position. And also, after the Trump administration, many expected that the United States will decrease its commitment to Ukraine, but it didn't happen. And also still NATO allies and the United States still support Ukraine, and I would say it's a diplomatic success for Kiev and for Ukraine. And in the future, I would say, Russian position will also, we will also change, given the NATO's commitment to increase its defense expenditures, because at the end of the day, both Russia and NATO both sides, are preparing for a prolonged war, are prepared for a war of attrition, and it's kind of a numbers game. At the end of the day, it's not about your the quality of your weapon systems. Of course, it's also important, but it's all about your ability to put forward more soldiers. It's about your ability to put forward more ammunition to the front, and it's all about a numbers game. And also NATO and Russia will try to adjust to this operational reality. And for now, I would say, of course, Russia will also increase its defense expenditures, and it will also try to increase its serial production capacity to meet the challenge coming from NATO, I would say.
And Mr. Ilhan, what do you think are the issues that might have been deliberately avoided or postponed in the summit or left unresolved this year? Were there any opportunities that you think NATO missed in this meeting over the past 2 days?
As I said, we are talking about a more European NATO, and actually it's not a new debate because it's been discussed for many years. But for now, I would say if we are talking about strategic autonomy or in a more European NATO, I would say the operational plans should also be adjusted to this reality. As I said, NATO is preparing for a war of attrition, and if you're preparing for a war of attrition, you cannot achieve strategic autonomy from the United States, because if NATO is preparing a war of attrition, then it means that it will, increase its dependency to the United States. And for now, I would say, if you're preparing a kind of a short victory, if you're preparing for a, short war, then you can achieve strategic autonomy. And that's why I think that there is a contradiction between NATO's strategic goal and operational goals, I would say. As I said, on the one hand, politically, NATO is saying that, hey, we are trying to decrease our dependence on the United States, but on the other hand, they are preparing for a prolonged war. As I said, I think this could be an important contradiction for NATO in upcoming years. Also, as long as the United States is there, the NATO is there. It's also an important fact. But if the United States is trying to reduce its commitment to do the defense of Europe, I would say Europe should adjust their operational plans accordingly. And I didn't see any kind of indication or any kind of sign about it. And of course, it was a political summit for NATO, and the operational and military adjustments will come after. But we will see how it goes in the next decades.
And Mr. Ilhan, just very quickly. Trump also announced that his request for Greenland also came up, which was very much pushed back by Greenland's Prime Minister. What were your thoughts on that? We know that NATO allies have been very vocal to stand with Greenland and making sure that it does not come under US rule or any type of ownership. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I would say the Greenland issue, is another symptom of this strife between the United States and Europe. And I would say it's not just a Trump anomaly. The European countries or European allies in NATO, tend to see what's going on in the United States as a Trump anomaly. But, I don't think that, it's just about Trump. Of course, Greenland is also an important geopolitical spot for the United States. During the Cold War, the United States, also, benefit the geopolitical location of Greenland. But after Trump administration, the United States is openly, stating that they need Greenland. And I don't think that this issue will be resolved in the short term, but I don't think that it's just all about Trump. After Trump, I would say at some point in the future, we will see that the United States will still, seriously consider to take it. I'm not talking about an formal, possession of the United States, but I think we will see increased U.S. presence and increased U.S. influence over the Greenland, and that's why I believe that in the long term, this strife between the United States and Europe will deepen. And the Greenland issue is just another indication or just another extension of this strife. And as I said, the European nations, should prepare to this reality, I would say.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Ilhan, for coming onto the programme and for sharing your thoughts on the NATO summit, which was held in Turkey. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Now, the first international forum on Islamic civilization in Uzbekistan is looking beyond history, focusing on education and international dialogue, which can help counter growing misconceptions about Islam. Our correspondent, Sevil Rajapova, reports.
Over 300 religious leaders, scholars and policymakers from over 50 countries have gathered in Uzbekistan for the first international forum on Islamic civilization. While much of the discussion centers on preserving manuscripts, history and scientific heritage, participants say the forum is equally important in addressing modern-day challenges facing Muslim communities. One of those challenges is the rise of Islamophobia and growing misconceptions about Islam. Delegates argue that education remains one of the most effective ways to promote understanding between cultures and faiths.
This is a monumental, important meeting of so many different countries coming together to talk about very important things. What is that important message? It is that there is a lost history of the impact of Muslim civilization on our world. Here we're working together with all the different partners to try to bring that story to life. Why? Because it's an important narrative. This is an important time in the world when, in the history, when the Muslim civilization had a very positive impact on our world.
Speakers say preserving Islamic civilization is not only about safeguarding centuries-old manuscripts or restoring historical sites. It is also about passing knowledge to younger generations and creating opportunities for international academic exchange. Many participants stress that greater dialogue between countries, scholars and educational institutions is essential for building stronger and more inclusive societies.
The importance of this forum is, in fact, to gather a lot of academics and intellectual and spiritual leaders of the Islamic world to come to know about your legacy in your country and to see for themselves what your great president has done to put it all together and to display it in such a beautiful way. It is such an achievement, and it reinforces that his belief in creating a third renaissance for the Islamic civilization.
Organizers hope the forum will not only strengthen international cooperation in research and education, but also help promote a deeper and more accurate understanding of Islamic civilization around the world. It is Sevil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
A sharp warning from Tbilisi to Brussels after Georgia's Parliament Speaker is pushing back hard against a new European Union proposal that could limit voting rights, including the veto for future member states, saying it risks turning candidate countries into second-class members. Our correspondent has the story in Tbilisi.
Speaking in Belgrade at the first ever conference of speakers of parliament from European Union candidate countries, Georgia's Shalva Paposhvili delivered some of his sharpest remarks yet on the bloc's enlargement process. At the center of his message was a new EU initiative that could restrict voting rights, including the veto for countries joining the bloc in the future. Paposhvili firmly rejected the idea of a two-tiered membership. He told reporters that if the EU changes its voting procedures, those changes need to apply equally to all members, not just to newcomers. He did not hold back on the comparison either, saying that EU should not put itself in a comic situation by turning the phrase "all are equal, but some are more equal" from Orwellian satire into actual policy. He went further, accusing individual EU states and at times Brussels itself of imposing shifting and unpredictable conditions on candidate countries. He described this as resembling political blackmail rather than genuine partnership and linked the obstacles to internal EU politics. election cycles and long-standing historical disputes between member states. Paposhvili called for enlargement to be strictly merit-based with clear and consistent benchmarks that don't shift depending on the political mood in Brussels. He urged the candidate countries, including Georgia, Serbia, and others across the Western Balkans, to stand together rather than compete with one another. He made the comments at the Belgrade conference, themed Shaping Europe's Future Together, which wrapped up with a joint declaration emphasizing unity among candidate status. The European Union has not publicly responded yet. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
It's now time for a quick break, but when I return, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Stay with me.
More than 20,000 partisan fighters have been hidden. We found only 3,000.
My grandmother had 3 brothers. In the graveyard, the body of just one of them.
Their struggle was very unequal and against a state that had defeated such a force as Nazi Germany.
A lot of resistant fighters in the beginning of Soviet occupation actually would end up here, if not killed somewhere in the woods.
She was arrested at her home. Her 7-year-old daughter ran to her and screamed, "Mom, please take me with you." This report having the names of the individuals who were placed in the list of deportations.
I was born in Kengia, in a labor camp. My mother was a partisan liaison.
The first years were extremely difficult, of course. Poverty, hunger. The temperature sometimes dropped to -50 degrees.
The train stations, like the one behind me, once said goodbyes to thousands of people carried from across the Baltic states towards Siberia.
Hello, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and I'm your host Nadia Jani. For just joining me, I'm going to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. The US has launched fresh strikes on Iran after Trump declared the peace efforts had collapsed. The International Monetary Fund warns that global economic risks are rising as the conflict continues to weigh in on growth. And the US removes Syria from its list of state sponsors of terrorism. Now we head first over to the headlines making their way around this morning across the globe and in the region. And we go first to Al Jazeera in relation to the 5 key takeaways from the NATO summit in Ankara. Now leaders have reiterated their commitment to Article 5 in a summit declaration. They also pointed out that defence spending and capability boosts promise as well further assistance for Ukraine and say Iran must open the Strait of Hormuz as well. Now Donald Trump had a number of points that he wanted to weigh in. A couple of those I'm going to now go into. Donald Trump says that the ceasefire deal with Iran is over and threatens to cut trade with Spain as well. Denmark's Prime Minister also reiterated its point that Greenland is not for sale in response to Trump's demands for the territory. Now, NATO chief Mark Rutte called the US strikes on Iran absolutely necessary as well in the summit. Now, billions worth of defense acquisitions have been announced, and US President Donald Trump said the US would grant Ukraine a license to manufacture Patriot missile interceptors. He also went on to say that he and Zelensky had developed a very good relationship, also insisting that both Kyiv and Moscow want to end the war. US President Donald Trump also hailed the tremendous unity at the NATO summit in Ankara and described it as tremendously successful. He referred to NATO Secretary General as a tremendous unifier, and the US President also praised the increases in European defense spending, taking credit for the increased contributions, which is quite interesting because Trump has been quite critical of NATO and the alliance in general, especially due to the US war in Iran, and none of them really responding as quickly as he would like to putting their efforts to open the Strait of Hormuz. So now that he's commending them for unity and for a great summit, it's quite a change in tone. And if we look down some of these pictures here, Trump joins NATO leaders in Turkey in photos, and just down here just shows some of the pictures that were taken over the past few days. And just to also state again, Greenland's Prime Minister issued a short statement press release after the renewed calls from Trump for control of the Arctic island, and he just basically stated that he wants to repeat that it is not for sale. He said our borders, international law and sovereignty will be respected, and went on to say the desire to occupy and control our country will not be changed, and it's something that they are sticking very much to. We know that a number of NATO allies are very much in support of Greenland's Prime Minister for it not to go under US control, but now Trump is also making another point of that, bringing that to the table, which is quite interesting. It's something that he's not wanting to let up anytime soon. Anyway, now let's move over to our next story this morning. That's on the Guardian website in relation to the typhoon that has hit China. And if we keep scrolling down, there's so many pictures to get through, so I really want to show the audience as much as possible on this. Now, typhoon, tornadoes, landslides, deadly weather ravages China in a number of pictures, as you can see here, just from some of the drone footage that has been shown on the news program and across a number of social media outlets. Because of the typhoon, Maysak caused severe flooding and killed 6 in the Gunji area, while tornadoes in Hubei province in the center killed at least 11 people. Now, rescue teams have evacuated stranded residents in southern China province, and residents have ridden through Nanning's waterlogged streets. Now, we're just coming up with some pictures here that you can see with rescue teams looking for anyone, any residents or any survivors due to the heavy downpour in a number of places within China, as you can see there. And if we keep scrolling down, you'll also see people trying to make their way through the waterlogged streets. There we are, some on scooters, some on mini motorbikes there as well. And as we keep scrolling down, there we are, just loads of houses with mud-covered streets, just all of this due to the heavy rainfall that you can see. And just to add that now Gunji has been allocated 100 million won after the typhoon Maysak caused 6 deaths and 130,000 evacuations. And as we can see there, just some of those who have been evacuated and coming out of the flooded waters there, with rescue teams continuing their efforts as well, going through all of that. We know that buildings as well were submerged in floodwaters, and a number of homes too. Just some of these pictures really reiterate just how deadly these the typhoon was, as well as the very heavy downfall of rain in and across parts of China. There we have it. Okay, now let's move over to our next headline this morning, and that's on that's on CNN's website, and that's in relation to the US and Iran. So it says US-Iran threaten more attacks as strikes continue. Trump attends NATO summit. Well, the US has launched a new round of strikes on Iran after President Donald Trump signaled he had hit them hard again tonight. And he said that at the end of the NATO summit on Wednesday evening. Now, we know that explosions have been reported by Iranian state media in parts of the country, especially the country's southern part, after the latest strikes, Trump also put on his social media Truth Social that this is retribution for yesterday's bombing of ships by Iran. If it happens again, it will get much worse, is what Trump wrote. Now, Iran has not yet responded to this, but has previously warned that any attack from the US would be met with an immediate response. It said now the US Central Command said strikes were carried out to further degrade Tehran's ability to threaten freedom of navigation in the Strait, and in a statement added that it was justified for its recent unjustified aggression against commercial shipping and civilian crews freely navigating through the vital international waterway. But now why don't we go to our report that shows more detail about the last 24 hours and the escalation in the region. Let's go to this report.
The United States has carried out a new wave of strikes on southern Iran after President Donald Trump warned he would hit them hard again following Tuesday's exchange of attacks. Explosions were reported along Iran's southern coast, including in the port cities of Bandar Abbas and Sirik on the strategically important Strait of Hormuz, while air defense systems were activated in Bandar Abbas. American military officials say its forces struck around 90 Iranian military targets. President Trump says the operation was retaliation for what he described as Iran's bombing of ships the previous day.
We just hit them very hard, and I say we hit them 20 to 1. Every time they hit us, we're going to hit them 20. And we did it last night. They did a little something today, but it was really retribution for last night. They hit actually 3 boats, not 2. And when they hit, we hit back much harder.
The US Central Command says the strikes were aimed at keeping the Strait of Hormuz open to shipping. Iran has not yet officially responded to the latest strikes. However, Iran's top negotiator, Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf, wrote on social media that any US military action would be met with an immediate response. Meanwhile, Gulf countries reported fresh Iranian attacks. Explosions were heard in Bahrain's capital, Manama. Kuwait said it intercepted missiles and drones, and Qatar issued a security alert. Speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One, President Trump said Iran had recently contacted the United States seeking a deal, but he questioned whether Tehran could be trusted to honor any future agreement.
As the crisis in the Middle East continues to create uncertainty for the global economy, the International Monetary Fund says world growth is expected to slow this year before recovering in 2027. The IMF says the impact of the conflict is being partially offset by rapid advances in artificial intelligence, which is boosting global demand. It has also upgraded China's growth forecast after a stronger than expected start to the year, while warning that higher oil prices and ongoing uncertainty remain key risks. Now, huge crowds have gathered in the Iraqi shrine city of Karbala on Thursday as the coffin of Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei arrived on the 6th and final day of the funeral. A funeral procession that has travelled through Tehran, Qum and the Iraqi city of Najaf. Thousands of mourners carried the coffin through the holy city before it was returned to Iran. Khamenei is due to be buried at the Imam Reza Shrine complex in Mashhad, one of the Shiite Islam's holiest cities. Russia is facing growing pressure on its fuel market after Ukrainian strikes targeted oil facilities in several regions. Moscow insists its energy systems remains resilient, but it now has moved to restrict diesel exports and increase supplies at home. Let's go to this report for more.
Russia is moving to protect its domestic fuel market after repeated Ukrainian strikes on its oil infrastructure, which adds pressure to supplies. On Thursday, it's reported that 2 oil facilities have been hit in Stavropol Krai and Tver. The latest attacks come as fuel shortages and price spikes have already been reported in several Russian regions, with drivers facing hours-long queues at filling stations. Now Moscow has introduced a temporary ban on diesel exports to increase supplies at home. However, Russian President Vladimir Putin says the country's energy system remains resilient.
It is absolutely clear that the enemy is trying to harm the economy and, most importantly, create nervous situation in the society. We all understand that this task is impossible to accomplish. The Russian energy system's resilience is very high, one of the highest in the world.
Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak says the fuel situation remains complex and acknowledges public concern. He says the export ban would help redirect diesel to the domestic market, while Russia is also preparing to import fuel in July. The government says the ban, which includes fuel producers, will remain in place until the 31st of July. Russia's seaborne diesel and gasoil exports had already fallen sharply in June, dropping 39% from the previous month to around 1.8 million metric tons. Benchmark European diesel margins rose to a record level after the export ban was announced. Turkey and Brazil remained the main buyers of Russian diesel in June, while Morocco, Egypt and Senegal were also among major importers. Meanwhile, Russia has fired ballistic missiles at Kiev overnight and sent jet-powered drones over the city throughout Wednesday. Ukrainian officials say 3 people have been killed and 13 people, including a child, are injured.
Turning to our top story now, and given the latest escalation following US President Donald Trump's announcement that the ceasefire is over and renewed military action on Iran, things have taken a sharp turn, where many might be asking if diplomacy can get a word in. To further discuss the wider implications is Shiraz Mahmood Khan, a research scholar at the Western Caspian University. Welcome to the program again.
My pleasure.
Wow, things have taken quite a turn in the past 24 hours is an understatement. I think. We know that Trump was just not too far from us in Turkey for the NATO summit, and it's where he really very much was very vocal about his position on Iran, doesn't think they're going to do a deal, is now called off the ceasefire, the 60-day ceasefire, which we thought was a really great step in the right direction towards diplomacy and coming together and building some form of peace alliance between the two countries. But now it looks like we're back to square one. And I just wanted to speak to you about that, because we've spoken a number of times on this subject. And now with this, is the war back on? I guess is the biggest question. And what does that mean for the future peace agreement, if there is going to be one, and the opening of the Strait of Hormuz?
Okay, so first thing first, that it was as we know that US and Iran had been in conflict for decades now. Bringing them together on the negotiation table was obviously almost impossible. But the negotiations would go on for sure, because there is always a backdoor diplomacy which goes on even in the hardest times in international relations or global politics. So that has all the chances to go on. As far as this thing is concerned, it was 3 vessels, around 3 or 4 vessels were hit by Iranian regime, which was not expected. And at the same time, the funeral of Mr. Khamenei was going on back in Iran, and thousands and thousands of people were there. What was the ideology behind striking this? Because the peace deal just took place a couple of days back, probably, and the world was happy that at least it will go on for 60 more days, but it did not really happen, and it's just quite unpredictable kind of a situation from Iran's side. And obviously it was hit back. The retaliation was expected, and US has claimed that it has hit 80 targets. We must know that we have Bandar Abbas, which is a very, very significant place in the Hormuz and all that, and plus Bandar Abbas was not named, but it can be targeted in future if this thing escalates.
Well, exactly that, and I think, as you mentioned, it's all happening during a time of mourning for Iran, which is what sparked this whole thing. The US first attack with Israel meant that Khamenei was unfortunately killed in the strikes in relation to that. So it also kind of, confirms the ideology that the West is against Iran, that they're burying their supreme leader, and now these attacks are coming through. Or does it show a different case of the IGRC, for example, have their own agenda in relation to striking these 3 vessels, whether or not they were right to do it or wrong to do it, and now the US retaliating. Are we going to be seeing more tit-for-tat strikes, or are we going to see a full blowout in regards to what Trump is saying? He wants to hit harder on Iran. He really wants to show off that he has a military might in all of this. But is that the best way to go when it comes to that?
You know what? The first thing first is that we don't know, actually, that who's running the show in Iran. Okay? It has been, even in the past, there were like 2 kind of a statement from the government side. It was different, but on the ground, things were happening differently. Right now, it should not have been done, but why Iran has done it, we've got no clue. Maybe it is because to make sure that thousands of people who were gathered for the funeral, to tell them, to give them a message, probably, that we stand by our rules, and Iran has not deteriorated yet, and Iran is standing whatever Iran was standing for. Maybe that kind of a message at this point in time. But this was not the right time for it was just they just went through the negotiations. It was just a few days back. I mean, so retaliation is expected, as J.D. Vance says that we will blow them off 10 times more than they do. So, that can obviously go to the escalation letter, and which is not really good, because even now the prices have gone up, the oil prices and all that, and it can go on to $105 or $110 a barrel, which will be a problem for all the economies around the world.
Well, exactly, and it's something that the IMF has forecasted, saying that the world economy is going to be hit very badly because of this. And it seems that Trump no longer really cares about that, because that was what Iran was using in the strategy when it came to pushing back on the US. Closing the Strait of Hormuz really did have a big impact on the US military campaign as well as the world, but it seems that that's been pushed aside, and very much being very staunch and very aggressive towards Iran in this. My question now is that, can we see any form of diplomacy? What would it take these 2 sides to come together? We know that Pakistan, as a mediator, has been very much at the forefront of all this, but are their efforts now fallen to the wayside? Are we going to have to see someone else step in? What could possibly happen to bring the 2 together?
Well, one of the mediators, Qatar, its vessel was hit as well. So mediators are being hit. That's not a good sign. But the thing is that obviously Pakistan would do its diplomacy, because Pakistan cannot really afford any kind of problems right on the border at this point in time, or any point in time. So Pakistan would definitely mediate. And obviously, as I said, in the future, or every hardest time possible you can ever imagine, the backdoor diplomacy is always opened. So it is whether through the countries or whether they're negotiating it directly, but at this point in time, as Trump said, that we cannot really negotiate with these cuckoos. So I mean, that was his exact words. But I don't know. Things can go for the negotiations as well, because at this point in time, Trump would not really escalate it as well at the same point in time, because then the escalation level will go up, and it would be a lot of pressure, not for Iranians only, but for the US as well, because the economies would start collapsing if this continues for a longer period of time. So that, and Trump is expecting the elections as well in future.
Yeah, the midterms.
And Trump consider himself to be the president of the peace. So maybe things go on and for the negotiations again, and Pakistan might, step in again, or Qatar. And I think the 2 mediators would stay intact.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's the fact of that Trump very much came into power because he appealed to the United States, the people there, in relation to he's a man of peace. He wants to end all the wars, which he has not been able to do. Ukraine and Russia are very much still in the thick of it, and then started a new one with Israel against Iran, talking about their nuclear capabilities and the change in government, which we still haven't really seen. Everything in Iran is pretty much much stayed exactly the same. But my question now is, what if the biggest risk isn't the fact that the war escalates, as you mentioned, but that it settles into a pattern of maybe a recurring limited conflict with no political resolution? So what would I mean by that? Basically, what would that mean for, I don't know, regional security? What would that mean for global security if this continues just to have, contentious information between the two countries and nothing really is, done on the diplomatic level? Okay, so the escalation would go on in case if it goes on. The oil prices will go up, economies will start collapsing, the refugee will start crossing the borders, and it would not only affect Pakistan and Azerbaijan and all those countries which are bordering of, but it can give a vacuum for the terrorism, because Afghanistan is there. Afghanistan is having the most around 30 to 40,000 terrorist people in Afghanistan, according to one of the reports and one of the Russian reports. So that can escalate, and if the terrorism escalates and the refugee starts moving in here and there, and the economies collapse, I think it would not be only a problem of Iran or Pakistan, but for the whole region. And Central Asia comes in that. Yes, and just on the whole region, we also have to bring Lebanon into that, because Israel's troops are still in southern Lebanon in relation to that. What do you think Israel's position is now that they're seeing that the US is going harder on Iran? Is that a positive or a negative step for them with their ally? Well, as far as Israel is concerned, Israel wants US to go harder, because in the first place, Netanyahu said that they are not the people to negotiate in the first place. That was his stance, and the stances of US kept on changing, the stances of Iran kept on changing. There were a few U-turns, there were a few hard talk or soft talk and diplomacy and all that. But as we see the stance of Israel, it was there, it's still there, and obviously Israel would want US to give Iran a tough time in Hormuz and all that. But whether that can happen or not, that's other part of the story, because it is, if you see it from the military point of view, you can bomb the place, but taking care of the Hormuz needs some more kind of a warfare, and that is asymmetrical kind of a warfare where Iranians are quite skilled in that. So it is very hard. It's a very complicated, by the way, it's a very complicated warfare we're talking about. If you go into the details, that's another, but right now, taking control of Hormuz, that can be done by Iranians as well at the same time. But as far as Lebanon is concerned, I think they would keep on keep on hitting Lebanon unless until their own agenda is served. The pressure will still, Israel will still put pressure on the basically fighters. I cannot see Israel withdrawing from Lebanon. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Khan. This is all to play for. We don't know what is going on, but it's very interesting with the latest. It's really hard to analyze the situation because every time the statements are changing. So first the U.S. statements was quite hard, but then after some times the same Trump, it was not really hard. And then it went on. Yes, we know that he's a very unpredictable at the moment. Very unpredictable and changes his mind a lot. But no, thank you, Mr. Khan, for joining me this morning. Right, we now head over to South America, and 2 weeks after Venezuela's devastating twin earthquakes, relief efforts are entering a new phase. As thousands remain homeless and communities continue to rebuild, the government is seeking access to frozen overseas assets to help fund the country's recovery. Here's more.
2 weeks after Venezuela's twin earthquakes, the country's recovery effort is increasingly focused on humanitarian relief, reconstruction, and support for thousands of families left without homes. Aid distribution continues across the worst affected areas, with residents in La Guaira receiving food and essential supplies as local and international organizations expand their operations.
We are grateful to the diaspora, to Venezuelan immigrants across the United States, particularly in Miami, and to the donors and sponsors for delivering this humanitarian aid to people who have been greatly affected. We already have our first warehouse here, and we plan to stay for several years bringing aid. Today, we will deliver more than 2,000 family boxes, one for each family.
Across the country, businesses and volunteers are continuing to adapt to the scale of the tragedy. In one workshop, fashion designers have suspended normal production to manufacture body bags, reflecting the continuing human toll of the disaster.
It is a completely different feeling because there is pain, but at the same time it fills us with satisfaction to know that from our small contribution and from our platform, we are helping.
The acting president says Venezuela has formally requested the release of state assets frozen abroad.
I have decided to send a letter, among others, to the King of England, asking for the gold being held at the Bank of England to be released. That gold belongs to our people, and it must be used to address the terrible, tragic consequences of this double earthquake. Venezuela has the resources to recover and to get back on its feet.
According to National Assembly President Jorge Rodriguez, the death toll has risen to more than 3,800, with more than 16,740 people injured. More than 6,400 people have been rescued, nearly 18,000 remain homeless, and almost 87,000 families have received assistance.
Now, the US President Donald Trump announced on Wednesday that he's decided to remove Syria from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. Trump said the move would help remove barriers to rebuilding the country and encourage American investment. The decision has been sent to Congress, which will carry out a 45-day review before it can take effect. Syrian officials welcome the announcement, saying it would support investment, economic recovery, and the country's return to the global economy. The move follows Trump's decision to end a US sanctions program on Syria last year. Now we head to a bit of music because the Rolling Stones are preparing to hit the road again as they launch their new album, Foreign Tongues. The launch was marked by a drone show over the River Thames in London, the UK, featuring the band's iconic lips and tongue logo. Mick Jagger says he and guitarist Ronnie Wood hope to tour the new album. It's the band's 25th studio release and arrives on Friday, featuring collaborations with Paul McCartney, Robert Smith of The Cure, and Chad Smith of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And now we turn over to the World Cup, where normally I will provide you with overnight results, but there aren't any. We just have a bit of Bieber because Justin Bieber has joined the star-studded list of halftime performers who will close out the 2026 World Cup in New York. The Canadian pop star will perform alongside Madonna, Shakira, and K-pop ensemble BTS during the tournament's first ever Super Bowl-style halftime show on the 19th of July, which is next Sunday. I'm sure that's going to be an interesting time. Whether or not it works for football audiences, I'm not too sure. But those are the stories for you this morning. Thank you so much for joining me. But make sure you stay tuned to A News for a number of updates throughout the course of the day. And I'll be back tomorrow with more information on the key stories in the region and across the globe. Thank you so much.